So now we're going to get into some really fun stuff, and I'm excited to get onto these lessons because these are some really awesome techniques, and if it's your first time going through them, it's really exciting to learn and play around with. So essentially what the main reflection setup is, I just want to remind you guys about the physics of light lesson, and kind of why I taught that lesson is going to come kind of full circle with what we're doing with these kind of glossy and sharp reflections. So if I just let my comp load here for a minute. So we have these, again, with the super hot specular highlights, maybe some water or puddle there. And then we have these blurry kind of glossy reflections around on the surface. And then obviously maybe some diffuse light that's not so reflective, but it's still light absorbing into maybe some drier ground. And essentially what that looks like, if we just do it on a radial here, is something like this. So if we have a light moving, we have the mirror-like reflection, which is kind of the wet puddle if there's water on that surface and it's a smooth surface, and we have the roughness around. So if we move that through and we look at what that looks like, it's going to look something like this. So this is a simplified version of what we're kind of doing on a still image, but all of the techniques apply to moving images as well. So I created this really, really fast just to show you guys essentially the idea of what we're doing. So this is the simplified version, and then we'll go into the more complex layering system and setup that I've done here, and a couple different theory lessons as well. So the first one we're going to want to look at is just, I'm going to quickly show you guys this node that I've created. It's very simple. It's not fancy or anything like that. If we open it up and we hit Control Enter, you can actually open and see what's inside that node. It opens as a group. And all it is the same technique we taught in Nuke 303 on how to use an iDistort node using an alpha. So all it takes is an alpha picture. It takes the original image, shuffles it into the forward U and forward V channels, and then it uses those channels to distort the image. So that's essentially the technique of how to get this eyeglass node. And if you just want to download the node, it's free in my script. I've created it. I'll put it up at the top for you guys, and you can use this on whatever you want here. So I'll chuck it in with the custom nodes, and you can keep these nodes handy. But that's a pretty useful way of doing that. So instead of doing all those annoying kind of iDistort and all these layers, you just create a simple gizmo that does it for you. And I've set it up so you can adjust the scale, you can blur it a little bit, and that's only two little effects that will just save you time. And there are more advanced iTransform. They're called i_transform. You can probably find that in Nukepedia, and some of them are a bit more advanced. I just created a really cheap one, and it does the job. So essentially the main, I guess this is like a quick theory lesson just to remind you guys of the concept. All I did here to create this effect is mirror this. I blurred it vertically because this happens sometimes with reflections, and I took a noise pattern and used my eyeglass on this, and then I merged this over the top. So we have this sort of distorting kind of mirror effect, which already gets us most of the way there. But then what I did was we want to create the roughness version now. So now we have like the specular main ping. Now we're creating the second layer, which is the glossy reflection. So all I did was I took the mirror, so I mirrored that sphere again, stretched it out the same way, but this time I glowed it, and I masked that into that same noise pattern, but just the broad glow is masking it. And I used that as a blur mask into, so this is the matte that we created, and I'm using that to blur this thing that we've already created. So essentially it does that. And why I used a blur instead of like I could just merge this over. If I just merge this over, you'll see the difference. It looks like that versus the blur, which looks a little bit different. The blur actually sometimes gives you darker values over the lighter values, which can actually happen in reflection sometimes. So it's kind of interesting looking. So you could do it either way. You could do a merge over, and you could adjust your alpha like that, or you could just blur it. And sometimes blur works really, really well, and it makes things look really glossy. So I used the blur and masked it by that alpha instead. Also, what's cool about the blur is you can adjust it in X and Y, so you could blur it a little bit more in the X if you wanted, and you could have something like that. So whatever, that's kind of the main idea. And then all I did lastly was I keyed that result because I wanted to ping some of the closer, like if you imagine this is asphalt or some rocks, maybe some of the ones near the center would brighten a little bit more. So I keyed it and I started to isolate that effect towards the center. So I just so I could get the edges of it. And after that, I masked it by that same noise pattern. So here's the noise pattern that we created. So we just have something like this, and I use that alpha to brighten. So you see what it's doing? It's just brightening the highlights around, just around the center of the reflection. So it gives us sort of this multi-layer pinging technique, and that creates sort of a reflection moving along the surface. And you could adjust this noise pattern. You know, if you didn't want so much water, if you wanted it to be more like glossy, you could always adjust the scale of this pattern, and then you could adjust the scale of this pattern as well and make it maybe more of a blurry reflection. There's less puddles or something like that. So essentially that's kind of how you can work with this. I liked keeping it more reflective just because it looks a pretty cool effect. Essentially this is kind of what we're doing in this comp here, but I do use a little bit more of an advanced technique here, which I'm going to go over. But I just wanted to show you guys the visual idea and the way, again, that I'm thinking about this. So we'll move on to the next lesson, and I'll start talking about how I created this effect.